The big O. Today, we're gonna talk about the female orgasm. Female orgasms, what we know in science, what we know about the cycle, anatomy, and why they're important. So if you wanna know more about understanding the mechanics, the types, the uniqueness of a female orgasm, and ultimately how to have one, you have come to the right place. Hi, I'm Al. I'm the founder of Dame, a sexual wellness brand dedicated to cultivating pleasure by having honest conversations about sex. I started this business about 8 years ago. I wanted to be a sex therapist. I have my master's in clinical psychology and have been practicing sex education for quite some time. If you want to learn more about Dame, check out our About Dame video linked in the description below. There you can learn so much more about the work we've done, the products that we've created, and the ways we have fought for female sexual pleasure. Let's start out by first understanding what happens to our body during sex that ultimately leads to an orgasm. I think in order to first understand the female orgasm, we need to have the context of the sexual response cycle, which was originally attempted to be defined by Masters and Johnson. They had 4 phases: excited, plateau, orgasm, and then a refractory period. Personally, I've always found this linear model a little too male-centered. I don't really think that the plateau concept really exists in the female body. So we're gonna redefine them. We're gonna talk about desire as a phase, arousal, orgasm, and then coming back to baseline. Those will be kind of the 4 that we're gonna talk about here. Even when we first think about sexual desire and stimuli and getting in the mood, this can happen in so many different ways, especially for vulva-bodied people. I think it's a much more masculine tendency to have spontaneous sexual desire. Oftentimes, vulva-bodied people first really want to make sure they feel safe and emotionally connected before they find themselves sexually excited. After there's a desire and an interest in having sex, then there's arousal. And of course, arousal can also lead to desire, so it's really important to make sure we're just sometimes allowing our bodies to be receptive to sexual desire, and then the arousal kind of helps with the desire. In the excitement period, in that period where we're becoming aroused, the vagina gets wet, it gets engorged with blood, the clitoris swells, and the vulva and vagina might seem a little bit darker in color due to that increased blood flow. That increased blood flow is also going to engorge the labia, kind of opening up the vagina, turning out the labia. The uterus and cervix are pulled back into the body, which actually makes the vagina up to 2 inches longer. Our heart rate and blood pressure increase, our breasts swell, our nipples stiffen. Even our largest sexual organ, the skin, changes. We start to sweat, we glow. And this arousal period can take up to 20 minutes for vulva-bodied folks, which is a lot longer than penis havers. So that's something to keep in mind as we talk more about how to achieve an orgasm. We also start to see changes in our brain. We're gonna talk a lot about the neurotransmitters that kind of surge during orgasm. They start to show up during the arousal phase. Our lateral orbital frontal cortex becomes less active. So it makes us have less anxiety, and it makes us a little bit more open to things that maybe we would think were a little gross in a non-aroused state. And now that we understand the arousal phase, let's talk about satisfaction and orgasm. Orgasms are considered the peak of pleasure during the sexual response cycle. I view them as one of our most primordial energetic releases. So what happens in our body is that we experience contractions. We can experience those contractions at our vaginal opening, in our vaginal walls, in our uterus, around our urethra, and in the back. In fact, our sphincter will even contract, and I always love thinking about the first scientist who discovered that. And what happens in our brain is we see a huge release in dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin, all of which help improve our mood. In fact, this kind of concoction of drugs, we can also see it when we breastfeed, when we take drugs. So as you can imagine, it's pretty powerful and enjoyable. We also see the part of our brain that responds to our genital cortex. That part will also be stimulated, and in our thalamus, it will also help us connect memories of past sexual experiences and fantasies to our current experience, which is pretty cool. A lot of these are neurotransmitters I'm talking about that make us feel really good. They also help reduce pain. So a lot of things that might be painful outside of sex might actually even feel pleasurable during sex. In fact, the relationship between pain and pleasure in our brains is surprisingly connected. Orgasms, especially orgasms in vulva-bodied people, they often start with a very intense contraction, but not always. And we can continue to have up to, I think, 12 or 15 contractions. Our orgasm can last for anywhere from 2 seconds to a full minute. And we don't necessarily immediately experience a refractory or baseline experience post an orgasm. We can restart the cycle and have more orgasms. After we've had orgasms, we see our blood flow kind of go back, we hit more of a baseline. Sometimes we don't want to be touched anymore. This is kind of what we think of a refractory period. Men tend to have very strong refractory periods. Some people with vulvas do as well, but some of them are less. Oftentimes when men have an orgasm, that's it, that's done. They are out for the count, they are sleepy, they don't want to be touched. They kind of really feel this dramatic movement back to baseline, while women, that orgasm doesn't necessarily create such a refractory period. It can, but it's a little bit easier for vulva-bodied folk to kind of stay with it and to kind of restart their sexual cycle again. So they're way more capable of having multiple orgasms, longer orgasms, and a little bit more diversity in their orgasms. When we have an orgasm, 30 different points of our brain light up. And we see increased blood flow, which is a common motif about sexual response cycles, increased blood flow in the brain. And this activation, this blood flow, is thought to be overall good for our brain health. Okay, so now I want to talk about the anatomy of the vulva so we can experience orgasms. So there are two main places that female-bodied people experience an orgasm. One is from their clitoris, and the second place is their G-spot. We can have orgasms literally from stroking our eyebrows or rubbing our nipples or not touching ourselves at all, but really those are the most common places, with the clitoris being the most common type of stimulation to produce an orgasm. We have a whole video on vaginal versus clitoral orgasms, so check out that link below. So now that we have a deep understanding about what happens to our body when we have an orgasm and on our way to an orgasm, I would love to give you some tips and tricks on how to engage in sensory play that will help you find your orgasm. So first of all, orgasms are not the end all be all. You don't need to have an orgasm in order to have good sex. It's not an indicator necessarily of good sex, and you can have good sex without one. However, I do think that wanting and calling in an orgasm is beautiful and empowering, and I encourage you to seek it. As we're trying to explore our bodies, I definitely think that solo play is a really powerful place to do it. It's a lot harder to learn how to ride a bike with somebody else on the bike, or teaching somebody how to ride your bike when you don't really know how to ride your bike. The point is, when we understand our bodies intimately on our own, we can do a much better job of bringing somebody else in. Find some space for yourself alone, maybe light some candles, set the mood. Find content that you love that helps get you into an erotic mindset, and then begin touching yourself. And we can just touch ourselves over our clothes, we can tickle our arms, we can tickle our thighs, we can even start touching our genitals over our clothes, which will kind of dampen the sensation and can really help warm ourselves up. It does usually take a lot less time during solo play than it does in partnered play, so be patient with yourself. It's always really helpful as we're trying to get aroused to rock our hips back and forth. This is gonna help bring our blood flow and our attention to our pelvis, so you can kind of match your breath here too, and that sensation is going to help create some blood flow in our second chakra, in our genitalia. We can start rubbing ourselves on top of our pants. I really recommend just finding hip movements that feel good for you. And we can take our pants off. We can start touching ourselves over our underwear. We can cup the vulva. I find that that's both a very grounding feeling to kind of cup and apply pressure, which is really nice both in the beginning and as an ending sensation. And then I highly recommend using your labia to touch test your clitoris, where you use your labia over your clitoris. That can help also create some dampened sensation that will help warm you up. Some people like to start patting the area. That will also help create some blood flow. We can start doing some figure eights around our clitoris and our vaginal opening. We can maybe put our fingers inside of ourselves if we're feeling aroused and wet enough for that experience and experiencing inside. And then we can also come back and drag our fingers out of our vaginas, up back to our clitoris, and really start applying some pressure to our clitorises and continue to kind of move our hips. We could bring in a vibrator, which of course is a really effective way of creating some stimulation that's a little different than what our fingers can produce, and just continue to explore here. And I think that as we continue to bring that breath and feel a rising of energy, eventually we just want to let go and submit to the energy that's building up inside of us and let it just blow outside of our heads and pussies. And yeah, so that's definitely one way to experience an orgasm. You can do this on your back. You can also do it on your stomach. You can grind up against some harder surfaces. You can also put a pillow in between you and a vibrator. There's so many body positions and ways to explore. This is just a few hopefully helpful tips that might help you guide yourself to pleasure. A big thing I want you to remember is that this is all about play, adult play. This is about finding fantasies in our mind. This is about playing and pushing either internally with ourselves and our bodies or sometimes with a partner, and we're constantly learning. Also, if you have habits or tips and tricks or things that you've discovered along the way that have helped you achieve orgasm, please comment below. We love seeing discourse here. Sharing is truly caring. It definitely, I think, was one of the most important things that I found at Dame in how we're trying to change this conversation and create sexual wellness is also simply by hosting dialogue and conversation so we can learn from each other. So, why do some women have trouble orgasming? Well, about 10% of women report being anorgasmic, which means that they are incapable of having an orgasm. And a lot of women at some point in their lives will struggle with the ability to have an orgasm. There are sometimes medical reasons why orgasms are elusive to us. And then of course there are also mental health challenges that can make it a lot harder too. But I think core to it is that we have a lack of education. Women are 4 times more likely than men to say that sex has been not at all pleasurable. What is still, I think, really surprising to so many people is that only 30% of women can even have an orgasm from internal penetration. That means most pleasure for most people with vulvas are coming from clitoral stimulation. So there also might just be a misdirection of stimulation and a misunderstanding of how to have an orgasm. I do think that when we have an orgasm, it can escape us. It can kind of happen before we're mentally prepared, and you're kind of left being like, oh, did I just have an orgasm? Or it's a smaller one building up to a bigger one. So there is this it feels like there's more of a range in the narrative. Plus, we don't necessarily ejaculate, having this physical experience that, says whether or not you've had one. We are gonna talk a lot more about female ejaculation at some point, so definitely subscribe and follow here if you're interested in learning more. If you are struggling to climax, I highly recommend trying out a sex toy. Sex toys have been commonly used to help women discover their pleasure. They can offer greater power, diversity, and stimulation than what you can maybe do with your fingers. And of course, here at Dame, we have a wide assortment of products that can help you find your pleasure. You can link in the description below to a video all about our different products. Dame has body-safe tools for sex that can help you explore your orgasmic potential. So please check them out. That's all I have for you today. Make sure you head over to dame.com/sexed to explore our products and subscribe for more content just like this. It has been a effing pleasure.